The command center of Outpost Station K7 hummed with activity. Senior Officer Park leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the strange reading on the main sensor display. His heart beat faster, but his voice remained calm. "Confirm that signature," he ordered. Lieutenant Kim's fingers moved quickly across her console, her brow furrowed in concentration as she analyzed the data. "Confirmed, sir. Unknown vessel at coordinates 227 to 89,104. She paused, double-checking her readings. "It's large, extremely large." Park moved closer to her station. "Classification." Kim shook her head slightly. "Nothing in our database matches exactly, but comparative analysis suggests a warship." She looked up at Park, her expression serious. "Based on radiation signatures and propulsion patterns, it appears to be of human origin." The words hung in the air. Every officer on the command deck froze. Some exchanged worried glances, while others stared at their screens in disbelief. The Vilari Confederacy had met many alien species during their expansion across the galaxy. Some became allies, others competitors, a few even enemies. But humans were different. The Vilari knew them only through intercepted communications and distant observations. Humans had never before traveled this far from their home system. Park walked slowly to the main viewing screen, hands clasped behind his back. "Show me." The screen flickered, then displayed a magnified image of the vessel. It was unlike any ship the Vilari had encountered. Dark metal plates covered its hull, interrupted by what appeared to be weapon ports. Its design seemed almost primitive compared to the sleek Vilari ships, yet something about it radiated power and danger. "Enhance Section 3, Park ordered. The image zoomed in on what looked like a massive cannon. Park had seen enough weapon systems in his career to recognize one that could cause serious damage. "Any transmissions?" he asked. "None, sir," replied the communications officer. "They're just waiting." Park considered his options. Protocol dictated that unknown vessels should be scanned and evaluated before any contact was initiated. But something told him this situation required special handling. "Notify High Command," he decided, "and prepare the diplomatic vessel for immediate departure." Within the hour, Ambassador Lee boarded the diplomatic vessel Star Messenger with a small team of experts. Lee was the Confederacy's most experienced diplomat, having negotiated 17 interspecies treaties over his long career. Yet, as the Star Messenger approached the human ship, he felt an unfamiliar sensation: nervousness. "We're receiving a transmission from the human vessel," announced the pilot. Lee straightened his formal robes. On screen, a human face appeared, female with dark hair and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. "This is Captain Elena Reyes of the HS Intrepid," she said. Her translator converted her words to perfect Vilari. "We welcome representatives of the Vilari Confederacy and grant permission to dock." "Thank you, Captain," Lee replied. "I am Ambassador Lee. We come in peace and friendship." The docking process was smooth. As Lee and his team entered the human ship, he was struck by how different it felt from Vilari vessels. The corridors were wider, the lighting brighter, and everywhere there were humans in uniform, watching them with curious eyes. Captain Reyes greeted them personally. She was shorter than Lee had expected, but carried herself with unmistakable authority. "Welcome aboard the Intrepid," she said. "We've prepared a meeting room for our discussions." The meeting room was spacious and comfortable. Lee presented the traditional Vilari greeting gift, a small crystal that captured and reflected light in beautiful patterns. "Thank you," Reyes said, examining the crystal with apparent appreciation. "In return, we offer this." She handed Lee a small device. It contains cultural and historical information about Earth and humanity. "We hope it will help build understanding between our peoples." Lee nodded. "Captain, if I may ask, why has humanity ventured so far from your home system now? Our records show you have been largely confined to your local region until this point." Reyes smiled slightly. "Exploration is in our nature, Ambassador. We seek knowledge and friendship with other intelligent species. Yet you come in a warship, observed one of Lee's advisors. The room grew quiet. Raya's smile faded. All our deep space vessels have defensive capabilities. The universe can be unpredictable. Perhaps you could tell us more about your ship's capabilities, Lee asked carefully, to avoid any misunderstandings. Captain Rice exchanged glances with her officers. We can provide a basic demonstration. Please, follow me. She led them to what appeared to be a simulation room. With a few commands, she created a three-dimensional display showing the Intrepid in space. Our hull is composed of adaptive nanomaterials that can repair most damage, she explained. The display showed the ship's outer layer shifting and moving like something alive. Our propulsion system uses controlled quantum field manipulation. The image showed the space around the ship rippling. And our defensive systems. She hesitated. Perhaps a practical demonstration would be clearer. With the Villari delegation's permission, Reyes ordered a small drone launched into space. From the Intrepid's observation deck, they watched as the drone moved away from the ship. The drone is now 5 kilometers away, Reyes said. She pressed a control on her wrist device. There was no visible beam, no explosion. The drone simply disappeared. Lee felt his inner eyelids blink rapidly in shock. What happened? Targeted gravity distortion, Reyes explained calmly. The drone was compressed to subatomic size. The Villari delegation fell silent. Such technology was theoretically possible, but the Confederacy scientists had estimated it was centuries away from practical application. We have other systems, Rice continued, but I believe this demonstrates our capabilities sufficiently. 2 hours later, Lee stood before the Confederacy Council, his usual composure noticeably shaken. The council chamber was filled with representatives from all 7 species of the Confederacy, each watching him with growing concern. The human vessel is called the HSS Intrepid, he reported. They received our delegation with courtesy, but he paused, struggling to find words. The weapons capabilities they demonstrated were beyond our current understanding. They claimed to come in peace, but the vessel itself is unlike anything we've encountered. He described what he had witnessed. Many counselors looked skeptical, others alarmed. Could this be deception? Asked Counselor Ba. An attempt to intimidate us. I do not believe so, Lee replied. Their technology appears genuine, and they made no threats. They simply showed us what they could do. Recommendations? Ba asked, leaning forward. Lee took a deep breath. He had spent his career building bridges between species, finding common ground for cooperation. But something about the humans unsettled him deeply. Not hostility. They had been unfailingly polite. Rather, it was the casual way they demonstrated power that could destroy worlds. Issue an immediate warning to all Villari vessels and outposts, he replied without hesitation. Human battleship detected. Approach with extreme caution. Fleet Commander Choi sat in his large chair on the bridge of his command ship, the unyielding resolve. He read the report from Ambassador Lee with growing irritation. His 3 pairs of eye membranes blinked rapidly, a sign of his disbelief. Ridiculous, he said, waving his hand dismissively. Ambassador Lee has always been prone to exaggeration. One human vessel, no matter how advanced, cannot pose a significant threat to a Villari battle group. Captain Han stood nearby, his posture straight and formal. Unlike his commander, Han took the report seriously. He studied the data transmitted from Outpost K7 with growing concern. The energy readings are concerning, sir, Han said carefully. They suggest capabilities we haven't. They suggest a species attempting to compensate for inferior numbers with intimidation tactics. Choi interrupted. His voice grew louder as his confidence increased. We have encountered this behavior before. Remember the Kalari. They also tried to scare us with fancy light shows, and in the end, they surrendered without firing a shot. Han wanted to point out that the Kalari situation had been very different, but he knew better than to argue with Commander Choi when his mind was made up. "Prepare a response force," Choi ordered. 5 cruisers should be sufficient to escort this intruder back to where it came from. 5 cruisers, sir?" Han asked, surprised at the small number. Standard protocol for unknown threats called for at least 10 vessels. "Are you questioning my orders, Captain?" Choi asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Captain Han bowed his head in acknowledgement. "No, sir. I will prepare the response force immediately." As Han left the command bridge, his misgivings grew stronger. He had served in the Villari fleet for 27 years and had developed a sense for danger. Something about this human vessel felt different from other encounters. But orders were orders. Within 6 hours, Han had assembled the battle group. 5 of the Confederacy's finest cruisers: Swift Current, Bright Honor, Distant Thunder, Rising Moon, and Steady Virtue. Han would command from Swift Current while maintaining communication with Commander Choi on the unyielding Resolve, which would remain at a safe distance. As the battle group prepared to depart, Han gathered his captains for a final briefing. "We know very little about human technology or tactics," he told them. "Ambassador Lee's report suggests they possess advanced weapon systems. We will approach with caution and attempt diplomatic communication first. And if diplomacy fails, ask Captain Su of the Rising Moon. Then we will demonstrate Villari resolve," Han replied, repeating Commander Choi's words without much conviction. "But our primary goal is to escort them from our territory without conflict." The 5 cruisers traveled at maximum speed and intercepted the HSS Intrepid near the Taiyang Nebula. The colorful gases of the nebula created a beautiful backdrop to what Han feared might become an ugly confrontation. The human vessel was even more imposing up close. It was roughly twice the size of Han's Swift Current, with a design that emphasized function over beauty. Various protrusions that could only be weapon systems dotted its hull. "They're not moving, sir," reported his tactical officer. "No change in their energy signature. They appear to be waiting." Han nodded and opened communications. "Human vessel, you have entered Villari sovereign space. Power down weapons and prepare to be escorted to the boundary." There was a brief pause before a response came through. The view screen showed a human female with an expression Han couldn't read. "This is Captain Rice of the HSS Intrepid," she said. Her voice was calm and measured. "We come with peaceful intent and request diplomatic discussions." Han was about to respond when Commander Choi's voice cut through on a private channel. "They're stalling," Choi said. "Show them we're serious. Fire a warning shot across their bow." Han hesitated. "Sir, I believe we should consider their request for—" "That's an order, Captain," Choi interrupted. "Fire the warning shot." With great reluctance, Han gave the order. The Swift Current's forward laser cannon fired, the beam deliberately passing 20 meters in front of the human vessel. What happened next would forever change Villari military doctrine. The Intrepid didn't move to evade. It didn't return fire in the conventional sense. Instead, the space around it seemed to bend and distort, like looking through rippling water. Han watched in horror as 3 of his cruisers, Bright Honor, Distant Thunder, and Steady Virtue, simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just gone, as if they had never been there at all. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic. "Unknown, sir," his tactical officer shouted. "Sensors show gravitational distortions around the human vessel. They're somehow manipulating space itself." Before Han could process this information, the rising moon exploded in a blinding flash. Later analysis would suggest it had been hit with a targeted antimatter burst. "Full retreat," Han ordered, his training finally overcoming his shock. "Maximum speed. Get us out of here." The Swift Current turned and accelerated away from the Intrepid. Han expected to be destroyed at any moment, but no attack came. Perhaps the humans had made their point, or perhaps they truly didn't want unnecessary bloodshed. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "We're receiving a transmission from the human vessel." On screen, Han ordered, bracing himself. Captain Reyes appeared again. Her expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes that might have been regret. "Captain Han," she said, "we responded to your aggression with proportional force. We still desire peaceful communication. Please relay to your leadership that the HS Intrepid will remain at these coordinates for 48 hours awaiting diplomatic contact." The screen went dark before Han could respond. The journey back to the command base was the longest of Han's life. How could he explain the loss of 4 cruisers and over 1,200 crew members? How could he describe weapons that defied the laws of physics as the Vilari understood them? Commander Choi was waiting when Han's damaged vessel limped into the docking bay. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by barely controlled rage. "Report, Captain," he demanded as soon as Han stepped onto the station. Han stood straight, despite his exhaustion and the minor injuries he had sustained when his ship's systems overloaded. "The human vessel possesses technology far beyond our current understanding," he said simply. 4 cruisers destroyed in less than 2 minutes. No conventional weapons were fired. They used what appeared to be gravitational distortion and targeted antimatter detonations. They literally rewrote physics around us. Choi's face paled. "Impossible. I witnessed it myself, sir," Han replied. "As did every surviving crew member on the Swift Current. The humans await diplomatic contact at the coordinates of the engagement. They say they still desire peaceful communication. After destroying 4 of our vessels." Choi asked incredulously. "After we fired on them," Han corrected quietly. "They responded to our aggression, and they allowed us to retreat when they could have destroyed us all." The full impact of what had happened was beginning to sink in. 1 human vessel had effortlessly destroyed 4 Vilari warships. If this represented typical human military capability, the entire Confederacy could be at risk. Choi turned away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Prepare your full report for the High Council," he said, his voice hollow. "They must be informed immediately." News spread quickly throughout Vilari space. The humans had arrived, and they were more powerful than anyone had imagined. Fear spread with the news, but also a question. If the humans were so powerful, why did they still seek diplomacy rather than conquest? Captain Alina Reyes stood before the memorial wall aboard the HS Intrepid. Her fingers gently touched the names etched into its smooth, dark surface. So many names. So many lives lost in humanity's long fight to survive among the stars. The wall stretched the entire length of the ship's main corridor. Every human warship carried such a memorial. It served as a reminder of why they fought, why they built such powerful weapons, why they never entered space unprepared. Reyes paused at one name in particular, Captain Thomas Reyes. Her father, lost during the Third Armada incursion 15 years ago. His sacrifice had saved 3 colony ships carrying over 12,000 civilians. "Captain." Reyes turned to see Executive Officer Song approaching quietly. Song moved with the careful grace of someone who had spent most of her life on spaceships. Her expression was respectful but urgent. "The command staff is assembled in the conference room as you requested," Song said. Reyes nodded. "Thank you, Song. I'll be right there." She touched her father's name one last time, then followed Song through the corridors of the massive battleship. Crew members they passed stood straight and nodded respectfully. Reyes could see the question in their eyes. What would happen next? In the conference room, the atmosphere was somber. Reyes's senior officers sat around the large table, their faces serious. Tactical displays showed the aftermath of the recent encounter with the Vilari ships. The blue dots representing the destroyed Vilari cruisers blinked slowly on the screen. Reyes took her seat at the head of the table. "We didn't come here to fight," she began, her voice steady but regretful. "But now we've killed nearly 400 Vilari personnel." Weapons Officer Kang leaned forward. His cybernetic right eye glowed faintly as he studied the tactical display. "They fired first, Captain. Standard defensive protocols were followed to the letter." Our standard defensive protocols are overwhelming to most species, Security Chief Yoon pointed out. She was the oldest person in the room, with gray streaks in her dark hair and the hard eyes of someone who had seen too much combat. We've been fighting for survival for so long, we'd forgotten how intimidating our technology appears to others. Rice nodded in acknowledgement. Humanity had not started as a warrior species. Earth's early history showed a people who created art, music, and literature. But decades of attacks from aggressive alien civilizations had transformed them. Now, humans were known throughout explored space as dangerous opponents. Many alien species avoided human territory entirely. The defensive response was automatic once they fired, Chief Engineer Bai added. The gravity distortion field engaged exactly as designed, and saved all our lives, Medical Officer O said quietly. If we hadn't responded immediately, we might be the ones dead right now. Intelligence Officer Jin, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. Captain, I've been analyzing their communications since the incident. The situation is worse than we thought. The Velari leadership believes we're an invasion force. They're mobilizing their entire fleet. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Velari Confederacy was vast, spanning over 200 star systems. Their technology might be less advanced than human weapons, but their numbers were overwhelming. Rise sighed heavily. The Arcturus incident all over again. Misunderstanding leading to bloodshed. Everyone in the room knew what she meant. 20 years ago, a similar misunderstanding with the Arcturus Collective had resulted in a 3-year war that cost millions of lives on both sides. It had ended with an uneasy peace, but the scars remained. We have two options, Song said, laying them out clearly as was her way. Withdraw to human space or continue our diplomatic mission despite the increased risk. If we leave, they'll believe their show of force drove us away, Jin observed. That could be dangerous for future human expeditions. They'll think aggression works against us. And how many more will die if we stay? Asked Medical Officer O. 4 ships destroyed already. How many more before they understand we don't want war? Rice stood up and walked to the viewport. The stars looked peaceful from here. It was hard to believe that among them, an alien fleet was gathering, preparing for what they thought would be a desperate defense of their territory. The Arcturus War taught us that retreat often leads to greater conflict later, she said finally. And our mission remains important. Humanity needs allies, not more enemies. She turned back to face her officers. Communications Officer Rio, prepare a comprehensive message explaining our peaceful intentions. Include historical records showing similar misunderstandings with other species and how they were resolved. Send it on all frequencies. Yes, Captain, Rio nodded, already making notes. Intelligence Officer Jin, continue monitoring their communications. I want to know the moment there's any change in their position. Understood, Captain. Chief Engineer Ba, I want our defensive systems recalibrated. If we're forced to respond again, I want options that are less final. Can we disable rather than destroy? Bai thought for a moment. It's possible. I can reconfigure the gravity distortion field to create localized system failures rather than complete molecular compression. It will take a few hours. Do it, Reyes ordered. She looked around the table at each of her officers. These were people she trusted with her life, people who had fought beside her in previous conflicts. I know some of you disagree with my decision to stay, but I believe it's our best chance to prevent another war. Security Chief Yoon, who had seemed skeptical, nodded slowly. Your father would have made the same choice, Captain. The mention of her father caught Reyes by surprise. She had not spoken of him often, but Yoon had served with him years ago. He always said that anyone can win a fight, Yoon continued. The real challenge is winning peace. Reyes felt a surge of determination. Then that's what we'll do. We'll win peace with the Velari, no matter how difficult. She returned to her seat and leaned forward, her decision made. We stay, we talk, and we hope they listen before more lives are lost." As the meeting ended and her officers returned to their stations, Reyes remained in the conference room alone. On the tactical display, a new alert had appeared. The Vilari fleet was moving, dozens of warships gathering near their central command base. She touched the control panel, bringing up an image of Earth. The blue-green planet looked small and vulnerable from this distance, billions of kilometers away. Yet it was for Earth, and for all human colonies, that the Intrepid had journeyed so far. Their mission was to find allies, to ensure humanity's survival in an often hostile universe. "We'll find a way," she whispered to the image of her homeworld. "We always do." Grand Admiral Zhang stood perfectly still on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Guardian. His eyes never left the tactical display where 57 capital ships and over 200 support vessels moved into perfect formation. The Vilari fleet was a beautiful sight, the result of centuries of military tradition and discipline. Yet Zhang felt no pride as he watched them prepare for battle, only a growing sense of unease. "Admiral, all vessels report ready," said his second-in-command, Officer Gill. Zhang nodded. "And the human vessel?" "The HSS Intrepid remains stationary at coordinates 227 to 89-104, reported his tactical officer. "No change in their position since the initial engagement. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, requesting dialogue." Zhang frowned. This didn't match the behavior of an invasion force. In his 40 years of military service, he had never known aggressors to stay in place and repeatedly request talks after demonstrating superior firepower. The large communication screen on the bridge activated. High Commander Moon's face appeared, his expression stern as always. Moon was the highest military authority in the Confederacy, and he had taken personal command of this operation from the Central Command Base. "Status report, Admiral," Moon demanded. "Fleet is in position, Commander. The human vessel continues to request dialogue." "Ignore it," Moon ordered, his voice hard. "This is clearly a delaying tactic while they assess our capabilities. They're probably scanning our fleet formation right now." Admiral Zhang hesitated. "The intelligence from Captain Han suggests." Captain Han allowed himself to be frightened by Theatrix. Moon interrupted. "One ship cannot possibly possess the firepower claimed in his report. The Confederacy will not be intimidated by a single vessel, no matter its origin." Zhang wanted to argue. He had known Han for years and respected his judgment. If Han said the human ship had destroyed 4 cruisers in minutes using technology beyond Vilari understanding, Zhang believed him. "With respect, Commander, perhaps we should at least hear what they have to say before." "Your caution is noted, Admiral." Moon cut him off. "But the decision has been made. The safety of the Confederacy requires decisive action. Proceed with the attack." The screen went dark. Zhang stood silent for a moment, aware that everyone on the bridge was watching him. He had his orders. "Send attack pattern Sigma to all vessels," he said finally. "Advance at half speed. Weapons free upon reaching optimal range." The massive Vilari fleet began to move. 57 capital ships, each nearly a kilometer long, surrounded by clouds of smaller support vessels and fighter craft. It was the largest military force assembled by the Confederacy in over a century, against one human ship. Aboard the HS Intrepid, Captain Rice stood on the bridge, watching the sensor display with a grim expression. The Vilari fleet was an impressive sight, even from this distance. "They're moving into attack formation," reported Tactical Officer Kang. "Multiple weapons systems powering up across their fleet." Reyes nodded. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Communications Officer Ryu, try again. "All frequencies, all languages in our database." Ryu worked quickly at her station. "Transmitting now, Captain." Message reads, "This is Captain Reyes of the HSS Intrepid. We request immediate dialogue to prevent unnecessary loss of life. Our mission is peaceful. Please respond." They waited. The Vilari fleet continued to advance. "Any response?" Reyes asked, already knowing the answer. None, Captain, Ree replied. All attempts at communication have been rejected. Reyes closed her eyes briefly. She had seen this before. Fear leading to aggression. Misunderstanding leading to bloodshed. It was the story of humanity's first centuries among the stars. So many lives lost because species couldn't find a way to talk to each other. They're leaving us no choice, Reyes said quietly. She looked around at her bridge crew. They were ready, as always, trained for this moment. Activate defensive systems. Ready quantum warfare suite. Defensive systems online. Confirmed security Chief Yoon. Gravity distortion field at standby. Quantum warfare suite ready, reported Intelligence Officer Jin from his station. Target analysis complete. We have full access to their command and control networks. Do we have non-lethal options? Reyes asked. Chief Engineer Ba nodded. Yes, Captain. As requested, I've reconfigured our systems to disable rather than destroy when possible. But I must warn you, with this many targets, some damage will be unavoidable. Reyes nodded. Understood. Our priority is survival and minimizing loss of life on both sides. She took a deep breath. Engage defensive protocols. What followed was not truly a battle. It was a demonstration of military technology so advanced it appeared like magic to the watching Vilari. The first wave of Vilari fighters suddenly found their navigation systems rewritten, sending them crashing into each other. No human weapon had fired. The quantum warfare suite had simply changed their programming from within. Next, several Vilari capital ships discovered their weapon systems targeting their own fleet. Crews watched in horror as their cannons rotated without commands and fired on friendly vessels. What's happening? Demanded High Commander Moon, his face pale on the communication screen. They're in our systems somehow, reported Officer Gill, frantically trying to lock out the ship's computers. They're rewriting our command protocols as if our encryption doesn't exist. Before Admiral Jang could respond, a new phenomenon appeared. Shimmering bubbles of distorted space surrounded key Vilari vessels. Within these bubbles, everything moved incredibly slowly. Time itself seemed to flow differently. Gravitational distortion fields, explained the science officer, his voice shaking. They're creating localized time dilation effects. Those ships are literally moving through time at a different rate than we are. Jang watched in disbelief as his mighty fleet disintegrated without the Intrepid firing a single conventional weapon. Ships crashed into each other. Friendly fire caused massive damage. Other vessels simply drifted, their crews unable to respond as time flowed like molasses around them. And still, the human ship broadcast the same message. We request dialogue. Our mission is peaceful. In 20 minutes, half the Vilari fleet was disabled or destroyed. The rest were scattered, their formation broken. Only the Eternal Guardian and 5 other capital ships remained fully functional. Retreat, whispered Officer Gill. Admiral, we must retreat. But Jang knew they couldn't run. The human ship had already proven it could disable their engines at will. And if they retreated now, what would stop the humans from following them back to populated systems? No, there was only one option left. A desperate one. All remaining vessels, he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Converge on the human ship, ramming speed. The 6 remaining capital ships turned and accelerated toward the Intrepid. If their weapons couldn't penetrate whatever defenses the humans had, perhaps the kinetic energy of a direct impact would. They're on a collision course, reported Kang on the Intrepid's bridge. 6 capital ships, all engines at maximum. Reyes looked at the tactical display. The Vilari ships were moving fast, their trajectories calculated to surround and ram the Intrepid from multiple angles. Can we disable their engines? She asked. Jin shook his head. They've physically disconnected their computer systems. They're flying manually. It was a clever move. Desperate, but clever. Without computer control, the quantum warfare suite couldn't affect their navigation. Gravity distortion field? Reyes asked. We can slow them, Yoon said. but not all 6 simultaneously without risking molecular compression. Reyes nodded. They had tried to be merciful. Now survival took priority. "Target the lead vessel with the gravity lance," she ordered. "Full compression." A beam of distorted space shot out from the Intrepid and touched the Eternal Guardian. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the massive Villari flagship began to shrink, faster and faster, compressed by artificial gravity millions of times stronger than normal. Within seconds, the kilometer-long vessel had been reduced to a sphere the size of a marble. The remaining 5 ships continued their approach. In the vast emptiness of space, the battle's remnants floated like broken dreams. The Intrepid, its shields barely holding, carefully moved through the scattered debris. Against all odds, they had captured the Villari flagship by targeting only its critical systems. Captain Reyes and Admiral Zhang sat across from each other in the conference room. Exhaustion and grief lined their faces. The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken questions. "Why are you here?" Zhang asked, her voice soft but direct. Reyes activated a holographic display that showed Earth's complex history. Images flickered. Centuries of defending against aggressive species, technological advances born from desperate survival, a once peaceful civilization transformed into a society always prepared for conflict. "We want allies, not enemies," Reyes explained. Her eyes told a story of countless battles and hard-learned lessons. Zhang watched the display, understanding slowly spreading across her face. The humans weren't conquerors. They were survivors who had been forced to become warriors but desperately wanted peace. "You're not here to destroy us," Zhang realized. "We're tired of fighting," Reyes responded. 3 days later, the Intrepid escorted Zhang's vessel back to Villari space. A fragile communication channel had been established, the first tiny bridge between 2 different civilizations. Across Villari space, a new order spread quickly. Every vessel and outpost received clear instructions. Human ships were to be treated with the highest diplomatic respect. No military engagement was permitted. The message was simple but powerful. These humans had mastered war, but they did not seek it. A new understanding had begun, born from the wreckage of battle and the hope of peaceful connection.